The banker's words cut through Katherine Reed like a knife through butter, and she stood there in front of his mahogany desk with her hands trembling, trying not to let the tears fall. "You are worthless, Miss Reed. A woman alone with debts she cannot pay and a failing ranch that should have been sold the moment your father drew his last breath. I will give you 30 days to vacate the property, and then the bank will take possession of everything." Katherine walked out of First National Bank of Yankton that scorching July afternoon in 1883, with her head held high despite the shame burning through her chest. The dusty streets of Yankton, South Dakota, were crowded with wagons and horses, people going about their business while her entire world crumbled around her. She had spent the last 6 months trying to keep her father's cattle ranch running after he died from pneumonia, but the debts had piled up faster than she could manage. The hired hands had left when she could not pay their wages, the cattle had gotten sick, and now the banker, that cold-hearted snake named Vincent Aldrich, had made it clear that she had no value in his eyes or in the eyes of this town. She untied her horse from the hitching post and climbed into the saddle, her worn brown skirt catching on the leather before she adjusted it. The ride back to the ranch would take an hour, and she needed that time to think about what she would do next. She had no family left, no money, and apparently no future in Yankton. The Dakota sun beat down mercilessly as she urged her horse into a trot, leaving the town behind. The Reed Ranch sat on 300 acres of rolling prairie land about 8 miles outside of town, nestled against a bend in the Missouri River where cottonwood trees provided some shade, and the grass grew thick enough to feed cattle. Her father had built it from nothing 20 years ago, and Katherine had grown up riding these fields, learning to rope and brand alongside the ranch hands. She knew every fence post, every watering hole, every place where the ground dipped and rose. This land was in her blood, and the thought of losing it made her physically ill. When she arrived at the ranch house, a modest 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch, she found a stranger sitting on the steps. He stood up as she approached, and she immediately noticed the way he moved with an easy confidence, like someone completely comfortable in his own skin. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His dark hair was too long, curling slightly at his collar, and he wore the typical outfit of a working cowboy: dusty boots, well-worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. A hat hung down his back on a cord, and his hazel eyes watched her with an intensity that made her nervous. "Can I help you?" Katherine asked, staying mounted on her horse. She had learned to be cautious around strange men, especially now that she was alone on the ranch. "Name is Preston Walker, madam," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "I heard in town that you might be looking for help with your cattle operation. I am a ranch hand, been working cattle drives and spreads from Texas to Montana for the past 10 years. Katherine almost laughed, but it came out as more of a bitter sound. "You heard wrong. I cannot afford to hire anyone." Preston studied her for a moment, and she felt uncomfortably exposed under his gaze. "I also heard that the bank is fixing to take your property. That true?" "That is none of your business," she said sharply, even though her throat tightened with emotion. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." She dismounted and started to lead her horse toward the barn, but Preston followed her. "I am not asking for much, just room and board and maybe a small wage once you get back on your feet. I have been on the trail for 3 months straight, and I could use a place to settle for a while." "I just told you I cannot pay you," Katherine said, stopping to face him. "Did you not hear me, or do you just not listen to women?" His expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. I heard you just fine. I am offering to work for food and a place to sleep until you can afford more. In return, I will help you save this ranch." "Why would you do that?" she asked suspiciously. "What is in it for you?" Preston glanced around at the property, taking in the broken fence rails, the overgrown weeds, the barn door hanging crooked on its hinges. "Because I know what it is like to lose everything, and because I think you deserve a chance to fight for what is yours." Katherine wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to leave and never come back, but the truth was that she desperately needed help. She could not manage 300 acres and a sick herd by herself, and she had already exhausted every other option. Pride would not save her ranch, but maybe this stranger could. "1 month," she finally said. "You work for 1 month and I will give you meals and the bunkhouse. If at the end of that month the situation has not improved, you move on." "Agreed." Preston extended his hand. "Agreed." His handshake was firm and warm, and Katherine felt a strange flutter in her stomach that she immediately pushed away. She could not afford distractions, especially not romantic ones. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. Over the next few days, Katherine learned that Preston Walker was a man of few words but considerable action. He woke before dawn and worked until well after dark, repairing fences, mucking out stalls, tending to the sick cattle with a knowledge of animal husbandry that impressed her. He never complained, never asked for breaks, and never questioned her when she gave instructions. At meals, which they took together in the ranch house kitchen since it seemed silly to make him eat alone in the bunkhouse, he was polite and respectful, asking about her father and the history of the ranch. "My father came out here in 1863, Katherine told him one evening over a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. "He was a soldier during the Civil War, fought for the Union, and when it was over, he wanted to get as far away from that violence as possible. He bought this land for almost nothing and spent 20 years building it into a real operation. At one point, we had 200 head of cattle and employed 6 men year-round." "What happened?" Preston asked, sopping up bean juice with his bread. Katherine sighed. "My mother died when I was 12. Cholera outbreak. My father never really recovered from that, I think. He became harder, more focused on work. Then last winter he caught pneumonia and it took him within 2 weeks. I tried to keep things running, but I did not realize how many debts he had accumulated. The bank note came due in March, and I could not make the payment. That is when Mr. Aldrich started making noise about foreclosure." "This banker, Aldrich," Preston said slowly. "He seems awfully eager to take your land." "The railroad is coming through this area next year," Katherine explained. "Everyone knows it. Land values are going up, and men like Aldrich see an opportunity to get rich. He has already foreclosed on 2 other properties this year." Preston was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as he chewed. Then he looked directly at her with those intense hazel eyes. "We are not going to let him take this place." The simple certainty in his voice made Katherine want to believe him, but she had been disappointed too many times already. "I appreciate your optimism, but I do not see how we can stop it. I owe the bank $1,500. Even if we sold every head of cattle I have left, it would not cover half of that." "Then we will find another way," Preston said firmly. "You are not worthless, Katherine. And this ranch is not a lost cause." Hearing him say her name, hearing him contradict the banker's cruel assessment, made something warm bloom in her chest. She had felt so alone, so defeated for so long. Having someone believe in her, even a stranger, meant more than she could express. The next morning, Preston asked if he could examine the cattle more closely. Katherine rode out with him to the north pasture, where most of the herd was grazing, about 40 head of mixed breeds that were all that remained of her father's once proud operation. Preston moved among them with practiced ease, checking their eyes, their coats, their hooves. When he was done, he came back to where Katherine waited on her horse. "You said some of them got sick," he said. "What were the symptoms?" "Lethargy, loss of appetite, discharge from the nose and eyes," Katherine recited. "I lost about 15 head before it seemed to pass." Preston nodded slowly. "Sounds like shipping fever. It is common after cattle have been stressed or exposed to bad conditions. The good news is that the ones who survived should be immune now, and the illness should not come back. But these cattle are underweight and need better grazing." "The grass here used to be better," Katherine admitted. "But without enough hands to rotate the herds properly, they have been overgrazing the same areas." "Then we move them," Preston said simply. "You have 300 acres. We set up a rotation system, give the grass time to recover. And we need to supplement their feed with some grain if you have any." "I have about 50 pounds left in the barn. We will need more. Do you have credit at the general store in town?" Katherine laughed bitterly. "Mr. Aldrich made sure everyone in town knows I am a bad risk. No one will extend me credit anymore." Preston thought for a moment. "I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to buy grain and supplies for a few weeks. We use that to get the cattle healthy, then we drive them to market in Sioux Falls. Prices are better there than at the local stockyard, and we can get enough to make a significant dent in your debt." "Sioux Falls is over 80 miles from here," Katherine protested. "It would take at least a week to drive 40 head that distance, maybe more. And cattle drives are dangerous with just 2 people." "You have a better idea?" Preston asked, not unkindly. Katherine did not. She chewed her lip, thinking through the logistics. It was risky, potentially foolish, but it might be her only chance. "All right. But I am paying you back every cent you spend on supplies. I do not take charity." Preston's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yes, madam." They spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the drive. Preston rode into town and bought grain, salt, and other supplies using his own money, while Katherine worked on mending tack and gathering the gear they would need. They moved the cattle to the best remaining grazing land and supplemented their diet with the grain, and within days Katherine could see the improvement. The animals gained weight, their coats grew shinier, their eyes brighter. Preston had been right. During this time, Katherine found herself watching Preston more than she should. She noticed the way he gentled a skittish calf with soft words and patient hands. She noticed how he always offered to take the heaviest loads, the hardest jobs. She noticed that he never looked at her with the dismissive condescension that most men did, the assumption that because she was a woman she was less capable. Instead, he treated her as an equal partner, asking her opinion, respecting her knowledge of the land and the animals. One evening, they were sitting on the porch after another long day of work, watching the sun set over the Missouri River in the distance. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink, and a cool breeze finally brought relief from the day's heat. "Why are you really doing this?" Katherine asked quietly. "The truth." Preston was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "When I was 20, I worked on a ranch down in Texas. The owner was a widow woman named Mrs. Harrington. Her husband had died, and the local cattle baron was trying to force her off her land. I watched her fight for 2 years to keep that place, watched her sacrifice everything. In the end, she lost anyway. The cattle baron got the land, and last I heard, Mrs. Harrington was living in a boarding house in San Antonio, working as a laundress." "I am sorry," Katherine said softly. "I was young and stupid back then," Preston continued. "I did not do enough to help her. I have always regretted that. So when I heard about your situation, I thought maybe I could make up for it. Maybe I could help you have a different ending." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "That is very kind of you." Preston turned to look at her, and in the fading light his face was serious, almost severe. "It is not just kindness. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Katherine. You have been dealt a terrible hand, but you have not given up. You keep fighting, keep working, even when everyone tells you that you cannot win. That takes real courage, real strength. I admire that more than I can say." The words hit Katherine like a physical blow, but in the best possible way. After months of being told she was worthless, incompetent, foolish for even trying, hearing Preston say he admired her strength made her feel like she could fly. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, and Katherine realized with a start that she was falling in love with this quiet, capable cowboy who had appeared on her doorstep when she needed him most. The realization terrified her because she could not afford to be distracted, could not afford to be vulnerable. But her heart did not seem to care about practicality. The day came to begin the cattle drive to Sioux Falls. They woke before dawn and spent the early morning hours gathering the herd, getting them moving in the right direction. Katherine had done short drives before with her father, moving cattle between pastures or to the local stockyard, but never anything this ambitious. Preston, however, seemed completely at ease, his horse responding to the slightest touch as he guided the cattle with expert precision. The first day was exhausting. They pushed the herd about 10 miles, following the Missouri River northeast toward their destination. The cattle were unaccustomed to traveling and kept trying to break away or stop to graze. By the time they made camp that evening, Katherine was so tired she could barely dismount. Preston, of course, immediately set about building a fire and preparing dinner while she tended to the horses. He had shot a rabbit earlier in the day, and he roasted it over the flames along with some beans and coffee. "How are you holding up?" he asked as they ate under a canopy of stars. "I am fine," Katherine lied, wincing at the soreness in her back and legs. Preston gave her a knowing look but did not push. "Tomorrow should be easier. The cattle are learning the routine." "Have you done many long drives?" Katherine asked. "Plenty. Worked 5 cattle drives from Texas up to Kansas in my early 20s. Those were 2-3 months on the trail with herds of 1,000 head or more. This is nothing compared to that." "What made you stop?" Preston poked at the fire with a stick. "I got tired of the violence. Too many stampedes, too many fights over water rights and grazing land. Too many men dying for no good reason. I decided I would rather work on a single ranch, help build something instead of just moving cattle around." "But you never settled anywhere permanently. Never found the right place, I suppose," he said, glancing at her. "Or the right reason to stay." The weight of his gaze made Katherine's breath catch. She told herself not to read too much into his words, but her treacherous heart refused to listen. On the 3rd day of the drive, they encountered their first real problem. They had made good progress, covering about 30 miles total, when they came across a group of 5 men on horseback blocking the trail ahead. Katherine's stomach clenched with fear. These men had the look of trouble, unshaven, heavily armed, and wearing expressions that said they enjoyed intimidation. "Well, well," said the man in the lead, a stocky fellow with a scar across his cheek. "What do we have here? A lady rancher and her friend." "We are just passing through," Preston said calmly, positioning his horse between Katherine and the men. "We do not want any trouble." "Trouble is, this is private land you are crossing," Scarface said with a nasty grin. "Belongs to Mr. Clyde Thornton. There is a fee for crossing, $5 a head." "This is open range," Katherine said, anger overriding her fear. No one owns this land. Mr. Thornton says otherwise. Now, you going to pay the fee, or do we have to take it out of your herd?" Preston's hand moved subtly toward the gun at his hip, but Katherine knew they were outnumbered. A fight would be suicide. "How much?" she asked. "Already told you. $5 a head. 40 cattle, that is $200. "That is robbery," Katherine said hotly. "Call it what you want," Scarface said with a shrug. Preston leaned over and spoke quietly to Katherine. "We do not have that kind of money, but we can offer them 5 head of cattle as payment. That is more than fair for crossing rights." Katherine hated the idea of giving up any of her precious cattle, but she could see no alternative. "Fine. You can take 5 head, but that is all." Scarface seemed to consider this. "Make it 10. "No," Preston said firmly. 5 is generous. You take it or we find another route." The two men stared at each other, tension crackling in the air. Finally, Scarface grinned. 5 head it is, but we get to choose which ones. They selected the best 5 cattle from the herd, of course, and Katherine had to bite her tongue to keep from protesting. Watching them drive her cattle away felt like losing a part of herself, but at least the rest of the herd was safe. "Let us keep moving," Preston said quietly once the men were out of sight. "I do not trust them not to come back for more." They pushed the remaining cattle hard for the rest of the day, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Thornton's men. By nightfall, they had covered another 12 miles and were both too exhausted to do more than wolf down some cold jerky and coffee before collapsing into their bedrolls. Katherine lay on her back, staring up at the stars, and felt tears of frustration slide down her temples into her hair. She had already lost so much, and now 5 more cattle were gone. At this rate, she would have nothing left to sell by the time they reached Sioux Falls. She heard movement, and then Preston was there, sitting beside her bedroll. "Hey," he said softly, "do not give up now. We still have 35 head and prices are high right now. We are going to make this work." "You cannot know that," Katherine said, her voice thick with tears. "Everything keeps going wrong." "I know you are strong enough to handle whatever comes," Preston said. "I have never met anyone as resilient as you, Katherine. You face every setback with courage and you keep moving forward. That is what matters." Katherine sat up, suddenly needing to be closer to him. "Why do you have so much faith in me? You barely know me." Preston reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "I know enough. I know that you are smart and capable. I know that you love this land and would do anything to protect it. I know that you treat your animals with kindness and your word with honor. What else do I need to know?" Katherine could not help herself. She leaned forward and kissed him, pressing her lips against his in a gesture born of desperation and gratitude, and something deeper that she was afraid to name. For a heartbeat, Preston was still surprised, and then he was kissing her back with a gentle intensity that made her whole body warm. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough, "I do not want to take advantage of you when you are vulnerable." "You are not," she assured him. "I want this, I want you." "I want you too," he admitted. "I have wanted you since the moment I saw you ride up to the ranch that first day, looking so fierce and determined despite everything you were facing. But I need you to know that this is not just physical for me. I am falling in love with you, Katherine Reed, and that is the truth." The words should have scared her, but instead they filled her with a warmth that spread from her chest to her fingertips. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not plan on it, did not want it to happen, but I cannot help it." Preston kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, and Katherine lost herself in the sensation. They held each other for a long time under the stars, and for the first time in months, Katherine felt hope that maybe, just maybe, Everything would work out. The next 4 days passed in a blur of long hours and hard work, but Katherine found that she did not mind as much with Preston by her side. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together seamlessly to keep the herd moving. At night, they would sit close by the fire, talking about their pasts and their dreams for the future. Preston told her about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 7 children, and how he had left home at 16 to find work. Katherine told him about learning to ride before she could walk, about the time she had broken her arm falling off a horse and had set it herself because the nearest doctor was 2 days away. "You set your own broken arm?" Preston asked, clearly impressed. "I had no choice," Katherine said with a shrug. "My father was away buying cattle and I was alone at the ranch. I used a board and some cloth strips to make a splint, and by the time my father came home a week later it was already starting to heal." "How old were you?" 14. Preston shook his head in amazement. "You are remarkable, you know that." Katherine felt herself blush. She was not accustomed to such open admiration. "I just did what was necessary." "That is what makes you remarkable," Preston said seriously. "Most people would have panicked or given up. You figured out what needed to be done and did it. That is strength, real strength." They finally reached the outskirts of Sioux Falls on the 8th day of the drive. The city was much larger than Yankton, with a bustling downtown area and a major stockyard that served buyers from all over the region. Preston guided them to the stockyard, where they penned the cattle and arranged for them to be auctioned the following morning. That night, they splurged on rooms at a hotel, the first real beds either of them had slept in for over a week. Katherine took a long bath, washing away the dust and grime of the trail, and changed into her cleanest dress. When she met Preston downstairs for dinner, she found him freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, looking almost like a different person. "You clean up well, Mr. Walker," she said with a smile. "You look beautiful, Miss Reed," he replied, offering his arm. They ate at a restaurant attached to the hotel, a luxury Katherine could not really afford but felt they deserved after such a grueling journey. Over steak and potatoes, they discussed the next day's auction. "I have been asking around," Preston said. "Prices are running about $30 a head for quality cattle right now. If we can get that for all 35, that is over $1,000. "That is not enough," Katherine said, her heart sinking. "I owe $1,500 to the bank, I know, but it is a start. And I have been thinking about other ways to raise money. Your ranch has good access to water, right? The river Bend." "Yes, it is one of the property's best features. Then we could offer water rights to neighboring ranchers for a fee during the dry season. Or we could lease some of the land for grazing. There are options, Katherine. The cattle sale is just the first step." Katherine wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. Even if everything went perfectly, she was not sure it would be enough to save the ranch. But she forced a smile and changed the subject, not wanting to ruin their evening together. The auction the next morning was nerve-wracking. Katherine stood at the rail of the stockyard with Preston beside her, watching as their cattle were driven into the auction ring in groups. The auctioneer rattled off descriptions and prices with practiced speed, and buyers called out their bids. To Katherine's relief and amazement, their cattle sold well. The healthy appearance of the animals, thanks to Preston's careful feeding and care over the past weeks, attracted multiple bidders. When the last group was sold, they tallied the results with the stockyard manager. "Total comes to $1,120, the manager said, counting out the money in cash. "Minus the stockyard fee, that is $1,070 even." Katherine accepted the money with shaking hands. It was more than she had seen in one place in her entire life, but it still was not enough. Preston seemed to sense her disappointment because he squeezed her shoulder gently. "It is a good start," he said again. They left Sioux Falls that afternoon, riding double on Preston's horse since they no longer had cattle to drive. The journey back to Yankton took 3 days, and Katherine spent most of that time pressed against Preston's back, her arms wrapped around his waist. Despite her worry about the ranch, she found herself savoring the closeness, the sense of security she felt with him. When they finally arrived back at the Reed Ranch, Katherine was shocked to see Vincent Aldrich's buggy parked in front of the house. The banker himself was standing on the porch, looking impatient, and Katherine felt her brief happiness evaporate. "Miss Reed," Aldrich said coldly as she and Preston dismounted, "you have been gone for quite some time. I was beginning to think you had abandoned the property." "I went to Sioux Falls to sell cattle," Katherine said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "And I have money to make a payment on the bank note." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the cash, counting out $1,000 in front of Aldrich. "That is $1,000 toward the debt. I will have the rest within the month." Aldrich's face went through several expressions, from surprise to anger to calculation. Finally, he took the money and counted it himself. "This still leaves $500 owed, plus the interest that has accrued over the past months. Call it $650 total. You have 2 weeks to pay it, or I will foreclose regardless of this payment." "2 weeks," Katherine said incredulously. "The original deadline was 30 days from when you came to see me. That was less than 3 weeks ago." "You missed the original payment date by several months," Aldrich said smugly. "I am being generous by giving you any additional time at all. 2 weeks, Miss Reed. Not a day more." He climbed into his buggy and drove away, leaving Katherine staring after him with fury and despair warring in her chest. Preston came to stand beside her. "He is changing the terms because he did not expect you to come back with that much money," Preston said quietly. "He wants this land, and he is going to do everything in his power to take it." "What am I going to do?" Katherine asked, her voice breaking. "I have nothing left to sell. No cattle, no assets, nothing. Where am I supposed to find $650 in 2 weeks? Preston was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he said, "I have some money saved, about $300. "No," Katherine said immediately. "I already owe you for the supplies you bought. I cannot take more of your money." "Why not?" Preston asked. "We are in this together, are we not?" "It is not your problem," Katherine insisted. "It became my problem the moment I fell in love with you," Preston said firmly. "Let me help, Katherine. Let me be your partner in this." Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. "It is not enough anyway. Even with your 300, we would still be short. Then we will find the rest. We will lease the water rights like I suggested, or we will sell timber from the Cottonwood Grove, or we will find some other way. But we will do it together." Katherine threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. "I do not deserve you," she said, her voice muffled. "Yes, you do," Preston said, holding her tightly. "You deserve everything good in this world, Katherine Reed." Over the next week, they worked frantically to raise the remaining money. Preston rode to every neighboring ranch within a day's travel, offering water rights to the river access during the late summer and fall months. Some ranchers turned him down, but others recognized the value of reliable water and agreed to pay. He also negotiated the sale of some of the cottonwood timber to a lumber company in Yankton that was building new warehouses. Meanwhile, Katherine took inventory of everything in the ranch house and barn, finding a few items of value that she was willing to sell. Her mother's silver tea service, her father's gold pocket watch, some tools and tack that were in good condition. It broke her heart to part with these things, especially her mother's tea service, but she reminded herself that keeping the land was more important than keeping objects. The land was her legacy, her future, and she would do whatever it took to save it. With 5 days left before Aldrich's deadline, they counted their money. Preston's $300, plus $200 from the water rights leases, $100 from the timber sale, and $75 from selling the personal items. That brought them to $675, just enough to cover the debt with a little left over. "We did it," Katherine said, hardly daring to believe it. "We actually did it." Preston grinned, the first truly carefree expression she had seen on his face. "We make a good team." "We do," Katherine agreed. Then impulsively she said, "Stay. After this is over, after I pay the bank, stay here with me. Help me run the ranch, be my partner in every sense of the word." Preston's expression grew serious. "Katherine, are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I am asking you to marry me," Katherine said, her heart pounding. "I know it is unconventional for a woman to propose, and maybe I am being too bold, but I love you, Preston Walker. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you believe in me when no one else does. I want to build a life with you here on this land. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Preston looked stunned. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming him from handsome to absolutely radiant. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Katherine, and there is nothing I want more than to spend the rest of my life with you." He pulled her into a kiss that was deep and passionate and full of promise. Katherine felt like her heart might burst from happiness. After so much loss and struggle, she had found something infinitely precious: love and partnership with a man who saw her true worth. 3 days later, they walked into the First National Bank of Yankton together. Vincent Aldrich was at his desk, and his expression soured when he saw them. "Miss Reed," he said coldly. "I trust you have the money." "I do," Katherine said, setting a leather pouch on his desk. $650, as agreed." Aldrich opened the pouch and counted the money slowly, clearly hoping to find a discrepancy. When he finished, he looked deeply unhappy. "This satisfies the debt," he admitted grudgingly. "However, there is still the matter of future payments. The annual interest on the remaining note will be—" "There is no remaining note," Katherine interrupted. "That money pays off the entire debt. The original loan was for $1,500. I have now paid you $1,000 in Sioux Falls and $650 today. That is $1,650 total, more than enough to cover the loan and any reasonable interest." "That is not how it works," Aldrich sputtered. "There are fees, administrative costs. Then show me the paperwork," Katherine said calmly. "Show me exactly what I owe." Aldrich glared at her, clearly caught in his own web of lies. He had been inflating the debt, trying to make it impossible for her to pay off. "Fine," he finally said. "The debt is paid, but mark my words, Miss Reed, you will not last 6 months out there. The first bad season, the first problem, and you will be back here begging for another loan." "I do not beg," Katherine said coldly, "and I certainly will not beg anything from you. Good day, Mr. Aldrich." She and Preston walked out of the bank with their heads high, and Katherine felt like she could float. The ranch was safe. She had defeated Aldrich's attempt to steal her land, and she had done it through her own hard work and determination, with Preston by her side. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Yankton. Katherine wore a new dress that Preston had surprised her with, a beautiful blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and Preston wore a suit he had borrowed from a friend. The preacher's wife and one of the neighboring ranchers served as witnesses, and afterward they celebrated with a meal at the hotel restaurant. "To my beautiful wife," Preston said, raising a glass of wine. "The strongest person I have ever met and the love of my life." "To my husband," Katherine replied, her eyes shining with happy tears. The man who saw my worth when everyone else called me worthless. Thank you for believing in me." They moved back to the ranch that evening as husband and wife, and Katherine felt like she was truly home for the first time since her father died. Preston was not just a partner in running the ranch but a partner in life, and she knew that together they could face anything. Over the next year, they worked hard to rebuild the Reed Ranch into a thriving operation. They bought more cattle with the money they made from continued water rights leases, and Preston's expertise in animal husbandry ensured that the herd stayed healthy and productive. Katherine managed the business side of things, negotiating prices and keeping meticulous records. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the heavy work, young men who reminded Katherine of how she and Preston had started. Hungry, determined, and willing to work hard for a fair wage. The ranch began to prosper in ways it never had, even in her father's best years. Katherine realized that her father had been a good cattleman but a poor businessman, letting too many debts accumulate and failing to diversify his income sources. She was determined not to make the same mistakes. In addition to cattle, they began raising horses, which brought in good money from the cavalry post near Sioux Falls. They also planted a large garden and sold vegetables to the growing population of Yankton. One evening in the fall of 1884, Katherine and Preston were sitting on the newly repaired porch watching the sunset. Katherine had some news that she had been waiting all day to share. "Preston," she said, taking his hand, "I am pregnant." Preston's eyes widened, and then his face split into the biggest smile she had ever seen. "Truly, truly," Katherine confirmed. "The doctor in town confirmed it this morning. We are going to have a baby in the spring." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were made of glass. "This is the best news I have ever received," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are going to be an amazing mother, Katherine." "And you will be an amazing father," she replied. Their son was born in April of 1885, a healthy boy with Preston's hazel eyes and Katherine's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Katherine's father, and he was the light of their lives. Katherine had worried that having a baby would make it difficult to manage the ranch, but Preston was a devoted father who took on as much of the child care as he could while still handling the ranch work. They also hired a young woman from town named Mary to help around the house and with the baby, which made things much easier. Little Thomas was a happy, curious child who loved being outside with the animals. By the time he was 2, he was toddling around the barnyard, chasing chickens and petting the horses. Katherine and Preston would often laugh at his antics, marveling at how much joy he brought to their lives. In 1887, Katherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara. She had Preston's calm temperament and Katherine's fierce determination, a combination that promised interesting things for her future. With 2 young children, the ranch house was full of noise and laughter, a stark contrast to the lonely silence that had filled it after Katherine's father died. The ranch continued to thrive. By 1889, they had over 200 head of cattle, a thriving horse breeding program, and enough income to expand the ranch house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor. They also paid off all remaining debts and even had money in the bank, something that gave Katherine immense satisfaction every time she thought about Vincent Aldrich. The banker had left Yankton in 1886 after being caught embezzling from the bank. It turned out that he had been stealing from multiple accounts to fund a lavish lifestyle, and when the bank auditors discovered the discrepancies, he had been arrested and sent to prison. The new bank manager was a fair, honest man named Mr. Griggs who treated Katherine with respect, and had even offered her a business loan at a favorable rate, when she wanted to expand the horse operation. She had accepted, knowing that this time the debt was manageable and would actually help grow the ranch rather than drain it. One afternoon in the summer of 1890, Katherine and Preston were working together to break in a new horse, a spirited mare that Preston thought would make an excellent addition to their breeding program. Thomas, now 5 years old, was watching from the fence rail while 3-year-old Clara played in the dirt nearby under Mary's watchful eye. "She is a beauty," Katherine said, admiring the mare's lines. "How much did you pay for her?" $50, Preston said. "But she will be worth 5 times that once we train her properly and breed her with our best stallion." Katherine nodded, trusting Preston's judgment completely. Over the years, they had become true partners in every sense, each bringing their own strengths to the marriage and the ranch. Preston understood animals in a way that seemed almost instinctive, while Katherine had a head for business that ensured they always made smart decisions about investments and expenses. "You ever think about where we would be if you had not shown up at my doorstep that day?" Katherine asked. Preston looked at her, his expression tender. "I think about it all the time. I think about how lucky I am that I heard about your situation, that I had the courage to come here and offer my help. You have given me everything, Katherine. A home, a family, a purpose. I was just a drifter before I met you." "You were never just anything," Katherine said firmly. "You were always extraordinary. You just needed the right place to show it." Preston leaned over and kissed her gently. "I love you, Mrs. Walker." "I love you too, Mr. Walker," Katherine replied. As the years passed, the ranch became one of the most successful operations in the Dakota Territory. And later, the state of South Dakota after it achieved statehood in 1889. Thomas grew into a capable young man who loved working with the cattle, while Clara showed a talent for horse training that rivaled her father's. In 1892, Katherine gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named James, and in 1895, their 4th and final child arrived, a daughter named Emma. The ranch house, once a symbol of Katherine's desperation and near failure, became a symbol of triumph and family. Katherine often thought about that terrible day when Vincent Aldrich had called her worthless, and she would smile to herself. That banker had been wrong about everything. She was not worthless. She was strong, capable, and resilient. She had saved her father's ranch through sheer determination, and with Preston by her side, she had built something even greater than what her father had achieved. Preston never let her forget how remarkable he thought she was. Even after 15 years of marriage, he would still tell her that she was the strongest person he had ever met. And Katherine, in turn, never let him forget how much she appreciated the way he had believed in her when no one else did. His faith in her had been the foundation on which she had rebuilt her life, and she was grateful for it every single day. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1905, Preston surprised Katherine with a beautiful new leather saddle, hand-tooled with intricate designs, and her initials embossed on the cantle. She was deeply touched by the gift, and that evening, after their children were in bed, they sat on the porch together as they had so many times over the years. "You remember what you said to me that first night we worked together?" Katherine asked. "You said I was not worthless." "I remember," Preston said, "and I meant it then just as I mean it now. You have never been worthless, Katherine. You have always been extraordinary." "You changed my life," Katherine said softly. "When I met you, I was broken and ready to give up. But you saw something in me that I could not see in myself. You saw strength and courage and value. You gave me hope when I had none left." "You did the same for me," Preston replied. "I was lost before I found you. I had spent 10 years drifting from place to place, never belonging anywhere. But the moment I saw you, I knew I had found home. You gave me purpose, Katherine. You gave me a reason to stay in one place and build something lasting." They kissed in the gathering darkness, a kiss full of love and gratitude and the deep contentment that comes from 20 years of partnership. The ranch spread out around them, 300 acres of thriving land that they had built together. Their children were healthy and happy, growing into strong, capable people who would one day continue the legacy of the Reed Ranch. Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the depths of despair to this moment of perfect happiness. She had lost everything, or so she had thought. But in losing, she had found something infinitely more precious. She had found Preston, and together they had built a life that was richer and fuller than anything she could have imagined. As they sat together watching the stars come out, Katherine felt a profound sense of peace. The banker had called her worthless, but the cowboy had called her the strongest person he had ever met. And in the end, the cowboy had been right. She was strong. She was valuable. She was loved. And that was worth more than all the gold in the world. The years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Thomas married a schoolteacher from Yankton in 1907 and brought his wife, Alice, to live on the ranch, building a small house on the eastern portion of the property. They gave Katherine and Preston their first grandchild, a boy named Henry, in 1908, and Katherine discovered that being a grandmother brought an entirely new dimension of joy to her life. Clara married in 1909 to a veterinarian who set up practice in Yankton, and though she moved to town, she visited the ranch frequently and often helped with the horse training. James, showing a head for business like his mother, took over much of the ranch's financial management, while young Emma, still just 14 in 1909, was already showing signs of being an exceptional horsewoman. Preston and Katherine gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing their children to take on more responsibility. But they remained active and involved, offering guidance when asked and still handling many of the tasks they had always loved. Preston could often be found in the stables working with the horses, and Katherine still managed the books and negotiated the major business deals. One crisp October morning in 1910, Katherine and Preston rode out together to the northernmost boundary of their property, where the land rose slightly to provide a view of the entire ranch. They had not done this in years, and it felt good to be in the saddle together, just the two of them like in the early days. "Look at what we built," Preston said, gesturing at the sprawling operation below them. The main ranch house, the expanded barn and stables, the bunkhouse for the ranch hands, Thomas's house, the corrals full of horses and cattle, the fields green with late summer grass. "When I first came here, this place was falling apart. Now look at it." "When you first came here, I was falling apart too," Katherine said with a smile. "We saved each other, Preston." "Yes, we did," he agreed, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying being together and surveying the fruits of their labor. Then Katherine said, "I was thinking we should set aside some of the profits this year to start a scholarship fund for young women who want to go to college. I know education for women is still not common out here, but I think it is important. I never had the opportunity myself, but I want other girls to have chances I never did." Preston looked at her with pride and admiration. "That is a wonderful idea. You always have been thinking about how to help others, even when you were struggling yourself. That is one of the many reasons I love you. I just remember what it felt like to be dismissed and underestimated," Katherine said. "If I can help even one young woman avoid that feeling, it will be worth it." They established the Katherine Reed Walker Scholarship Fund in early 1911, offering financial assistance to young women from farming and ranching families who wanted to pursue higher education. The first recipient was a 16-year-old girl named Sarah, whose family farm had failed, much like Catherine's ranch had almost failed years earlier. Katherine took special interest in Sarah's progress, and it gave her deep satisfaction to know that she was making a real difference in someone's life. As Katherine entered her 50s, she sometimes felt the weight of her years in her joints and in the occasional gray hair that appeared in her mirror. But she also felt a deep contentment that came from a life well lived. She had survived loss and hardship, had fought for what was hers, and had built something lasting and meaningful. More importantly, she had found love with a man who truly cherished her, who had seen her value when the world told her she had none. Preston aged too, of course, his dark hair going silver at the temples, and his face acquiring the weathered look of a man who had spent decades working outdoors. But to Katherine, he was just as handsome as the day he had first appeared on her doorstep, and the love she felt for him had only deepened with time. In the spring of 1913, on a particularly beautiful May afternoon, the entire family gathered at the main ranch house for a celebration. It was Katherine and Preston's 30th wedding anniversary, and their children had organized a party complete with a huge feast and a cake that Emma had helped Mary bake. All 4 children were there with their families, and the house was full of the sound of grandchildren laughing and playing. Thomas stood up to make a toast, raising his glass of cider. "To my parents, Preston and Katherine Walker, you built this ranch from nothing through hard work, determination, and love. You taught us that family is everything, that honor and integrity matter more than wealth, and that there is no challenge too great when you face it together. We love you both, and we are grateful every day for the example you have set for us. Happy anniversary." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and Katherine felt tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks. She looked around at all these people, her children and grandchildren, and the extended family of ranch hands and friends they had accumulated over the years, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Thank you all for being here. When I was 22 years old, I stood in a banker's office and was told I was worthless. I was told I had nothing to offer, that I should give up and let more capable people take over. For a while, I believed it. I thought maybe he was right, maybe I was not strong enough or smart enough to make it on my own." She paused and reached for Preston's hand. "But then this man came into my life. He told me I was strong. He told me I was capable. He believed in me when I could not believe in myself. And together, we proved that banker wrong in every possible way. We built this ranch, this family, this life. And I want all of you to remember that when someone tells you that you are not good enough or strong enough, they are wrong. You have value and you have worth, and you can accomplish anything you set your mind to if you have courage and determination and people who believe in you." There was not a dry eye in the room when she finished, and Preston pulled her into a tight embrace. "I love you," he whispered in her ear. "You are still the strongest person I have ever met. And you are still the love of my life," Katherine whispered back. They danced together that evening to music provided by James on the fiddle, their movements slower than they once were, but no less graceful. The children and grandchildren watched with smiles, seeing the love that still burned bright between their parents after 30 years of marriage. Katherine and Preston continued to live on the ranch for many more years, gradually handing over full control to Thomas and James, while they enjoyed a well-earned semi-retirement. They spent their days riding together across the land they loved. Working in the garden Katherine had expanded into an impressive operation that supplied vegetables to half the town. And most importantly, spending time with their growing number of grandchildren. Clara gave them 3 more grandchildren, James 4 and Emma, who married in 1915, eventually had 2. The ranch house was always full of visitors, and Katherine loved nothing more than having her entire family together, the children running wild through the fields she had once fought so hard to save. In the evenings, she and Preston would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the Missouri River, reflecting on their lives together. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the early days and all the challenges they had overcome. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and enjoying each other's presence. "You have any regrets?" Preston asked her one evening in 1920, when they were both in their late 50s. Katherine thought about the question carefully. "Only that my parents did not live to see what we built here. My father would have been so proud. But no, I do not regret anything about the life we have lived together. Even the hard parts were worth it because they brought us to where we are now." "I feel the same way," Preston said. "Every choice I made, every road I traveled led me to you, and that makes everything worthwhile." They lived to see their grandchildren grow up, graduate from school, get married, and start families of their own. The Reed Ranch became the Walker Ranch officially when Thomas and James took over full ownership, though everyone still called it Reed Ranch out of respect for Katherine's father and Katherine herself. It remained one of the most successful and respected operations in South Dakota, known for quality cattle and horses, and for the fair treatment of its workers. Katherine and Preston lived well into their 70s, their love for each other never dimming despite the inevitable changes that age brought. They remained best friends as well as spouses, partners in every sense of the word. When Preston died peacefully in his sleep in 1932 at the age of 74, Katherine grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing that they had shared a truly extraordinary life together. She followed him 3 years later in 1935, passing away surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren in the ranch house that had been the center of her world for over 50 years. Her last words were to thank her family for all the joy they had brought her, and to say that she was ready to be reunited with Preston. At her funeral, Thomas told the story of how his parents had met, how Preston had appeared when Katherine needed him most, and had seen value in her when everyone else called her worthless. He talked about the cattle drive to Sioux Falls, the confrontation with the banker, and the years of hard work that had built the ranch into what it was today. He reminded everyone that Katherine's strength and determination had saved not just the ranch, but had created a legacy that would continue for generations. "My mother was told she was worthless," Thomas said, his voice strong despite the tears on his cheeks. "But my father knew the truth. He knew she was the strongest person he had ever met. And he was right. She was strong enough to save a failing ranch, to fight against men who wanted to steal her land, to build a life from nothing. She was strong enough to be a loving wife, a devoted mother, and a generous friend to everyone who knew her. We will miss her terribly, but we will honor her memory by continuing the work she started, and by remembering the lessons she taught us about courage, integrity, and love." The Reed Ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the foundation that Katherine and Preston had built. Their love story became a legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation as an example of what two people could accomplish together when they believed in each other. The scholarship fund Katherine had established helped dozens of young women over the years, giving them opportunities they otherwise would never have had. And in the ranch house, hanging in a place of honor in the main parlor, was a photograph taken on Katherine and Preston's 30th anniversary. They stood together on the porch, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera with expressions of deep contentment and love. Beneath the photograph was a small plaque that read, "The banker called her worthless. The cowboy called her the strongest person he'd ever met." And together, they built a legacy of love. It was the truest thing ever written, a perfect summary of a life that had started in despair but had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. Katherine Reed Walker had proved her worth not just to herself, but to everyone who had doubted her. And she had done it with grace, determination, and the love of a good man by her side. Their story was one of triumph over adversity, of love conquering all obstacles, and of two souls finding exactly what they needed in each other. The land that Katherine had fought so hard to save remained in the family for over a century, passing from generation to generation, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But it all started with a young woman who refused to give up and a cowboy who saw her true worth when no one else could. Their love had built an empire, created a family, and left a mark on the world that would never be forgotten. And that was the greatest legacy of all.